My son tapped his spoon against the crystal glass and announced to the entire room that I was a financial burden who needed to move into a budget nursing home. He smiled at his guests, unaware that the 2,300 square foot penthouse, his luxury car, and the credit card in his wallet all legally belonged to me. I placed the roast turkey on the table and decided right then that I would grant his wish. My name is Eleanor Hartley, and despite the ache in my lower back, I kept my spine straight as I navigated the crowded living room of the 2,300 square foot penthouse in downtown Denver. At 62 years old, with my silver hair pulled back in a severe bun, I looked less like the woman who signed the deed to this property and more like the hired help my son pretended he could afford. The air inside was thick with the scent of roasted turkey and expensive perfume, a cloying mix that made it hard to breathe. I balanced a heavy silver platter of glazed carrots, weaving through the guests. My son, Jason, sat at the head of the long mahogany table like a king holding court. He adjusted the cuffs of his Italian suit, his face flushed with wine and self-importance. "It is a grind, you know," Jason said, his voice carrying over the low hum of jazz music. "Maintaining a place with a view like this, the association fees, the taxes. But it is worth it. Success has a price." He gestured vaguely toward me with his fork, not meeting my eyes. "And, of course, taking care of Mom. It is a lot of pressure. But that is what family does." I placed the carrots down near the center of the table. No one said, "Thank you." Brianna, his wife, swirled her Pinot Noir, her manicured nails clicking against the glass. She looked up from her phone, likely checking the engagement on her latest post about her perfect holiday. "Oh, tell me about it, Jace." She sighed loudly. "People do not realize the financial drain. I mean, we love having her here, obviously. But an extra adult in the house who does not contribute a single dollar, the grocery bills, the electricity, it really limits what we can do for ourselves. We are basically running a charity here." A ripple of uncomfortable laughter went through the room. My sister, sitting 3 seats down, stared intently at her mashed potatoes. My late husband's old friend, Tom, coughed and took a long drink of water. They all knew the truth, or at least they used to. Now, under the glare of the crystal chandelier I had picked out 10 years ago, they chose the comfort of Jason's narrative over the reality of mine. I moved to refill the wine glasses. My hand was steady, though my heart was hammering a painful rhythm against my ribs. I was a ghost in my own home, a spectre haunting the feast. Suddenly, the sharp clink, clink, clink of a spoon against crystal cut through the chatter. The room fell silent. Jason stood up, looking performatively solemn. "I have been doing some thinking," Jason announced, his eyes finally locking onto mine as I held a bottle of Merlot mid-air. "Mom, we cannot keep going on like this. It is not healthy for you to be so dependent. It is time for some tough love." I slowly set the bottle down. The silence was deafening. "If you want to keep living under my roof," Jason continued, his voice steady, projecting his courtroom persona, "you need to start paying rent, market rate, or, well, Brianna and I found a lovely facility on the edge of town. It is budget-friendly, and it would suit your fixed income." The humiliation was cold and sharp, like a knife sliding between my ribs. I looked around the table, searching for an ally. My eyes met my sister's. She looked away, crumbling a dinner roll on her plate. My brother-in-law checked his watch. Not one of them spoke. They were eating my food, drinking my wine, sitting in my chairs, and watching my son evict me. It is just about responsibility. Mum? Jason added, shrugging as if this were a minor inconvenience. No one gets a free ride forever. Exactly, Brianna chimed in, smirking. Do you know how much it costs just to polish these marble handrails? We have to be realistic. You are just a burden at this point. I felt a strange sensation wash over me. It was not anger. It was clarity. Absolute, crystalline clarity. I looked at the man I had birthed, the boy I had protected from every harsh wind, the man who believed he was a self-made titan while standing on my shoulders. I untied the strings of my apron. The fabric fell away, pooling at my feet. You are right, Jason, I said, my voice low but cutting through the silence like a razor. You are absolutely right. It is time everyone pays the exact price for what they are enjoying. I turned my back on the stunned silence, walking past the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the city I had helped build, and headed straight for the bedroom to pack my bags. The party was over. The silence of the bedroom was suffocating. So I closed my eyes and let the memory of noise wash over me. I travelled back 35 years to a diner in a small, rust-belt town in Ohio. I could still smell the stale coffee and grease on my uniform. Back then, I was just a night shift waitress with cracked, bleeding knuckles from scrubbing tables in the winter, counting quarters in my apron and dreaming of a front door that I did not have to unlock with a landlord's key. Then I met Michael Hartley. He was not a lawyer or a businessman. He was a carpenter with calloused hands and sawdust permanently caught in his eyelashes. He was a man of few words, but he had a vision that could strip away peeling paint and rotting wood to see the beauty underneath. That house has good bones, he told me on our third date, pointing at a condemned Victorian structure that looked ready to collapse. People give up on things, and people, too easily. We married 6 months later at the courthouse. There was no honeymoon in Paris or Hawaii. Instead, we scraped together every cent we had to buy a terrifyingly dilapidated wooden house. We spent our wedding night tearing up mouldy carpet. We fixed every step and sanded every plank ourselves because we could not afford to hire a single soul. Eventually, we moved west to Denver and started flipping houses. We bought cheap duplexes in the suburbs. Our weekends were consumed by drywall and plumbing. At night, we sat on the bare floor of our living room, eating sandwiches and calculating expenses with a pencil on the back of junk mail envelopes. If we skip the movies this month, Michael would say, tapping the paper, we can afford the better insulation for the property on Elm Street. Those early years were brutal. I remembered the year interest rates skyrocketed and a tenant vanished in the middle of the night, owing us 3 months of rent. Then, Michael fell off a ladder and broke his leg in 2 places. I worked 3 jobs that winter. I nursed him during the day, waited tables in the evening, and cleaned offices at night. I remember coming home one morning, exhausted, to find Michael trying to wash the dishes on his crutches, his face pale with pain. I am sorry, Ellie, he had whispered, his voice trembling as he looked at the broken plate on the floor. I am just a burden to you right now. You should not have to carry all this. You are my husband, I told him, sweeping up the shards. We build this together. We carry each other. That was the spirit that birthed our company. We were sitting in a cheap diner when Michael sketched a logo on a paper napkin. He wrote Everline Communities, LLC, Why Everline? I asked him. Because it sounds permanent, he said, smiling over his coffee. Like a line that never breaks. We are not just building houses, Ellie. We are building communities that last. We stopped flipping and started holding. We bought old apartment complexes in forgotten working-class neighborhoods. We accepted lower profits in exchange for stability. We knew the names of our tenants. We knew which single mother needed an extra week for rent and which elderly veteran needed a handrail installed in his shower. By the time Everline owned 30 properties, we were comfortable, but we never stopped working. Then came that Tuesday morning. It was a bright, sunny day at a construction site. Michael was laughing at a joke the foreman made. Then he just stopped. He collapsed onto the dirt, and before the ambulance could navigate the traffic, my Michael was gone. A massive stroke. I was left as a widow and the sole owner of a growing empire, standing at his grave, wearing a black dress that felt too tight across my chest. I made a promise to the cold earth. I will not let it become just a machine for money. Michael, I whispered to the wind. I will keep it safe. I will make it a shelter for people who are starting from zero, just like we were. I opened my eyes in the penthouse bedroom. The memory faded, leaving me with the cold reality of the present. I looked at the packed suitcase on the bed. My son thought he was teaching me a lesson about finance, but he had forgotten the history of the blood and sweat that paid for the floor he stood on. I zipped up the suitcase. I had kept my promise to Michael, but I had failed our son by shielding him from the struggle that made us who we were. It was time to fix that mistake. Reflecting on how we arrived at that disastrous dinner, my mind drifted back to a few years ago. Jason had just graduated from law school, standing in my small kitchen with his diploma in one hand and a glass of cheap wine in the other. He had been offered a position at a prestigious firm, but instead of celebrating, he was sulking. Mum, the salary sounds good on paper, but do you know what the cost of living is downtown? Jason had complained, loosening his tie with a frustrated jerk. By the time I pay for a decent apartment and the student loan interest, I will be eating instant noodles. I deserve better than a shoebox after all this work. I could not bear to see him discouraged. I wanted his start to be easier than mine. So, I made the first mistake. Everline Communities has a vacancy, I said casually, washing a dish to hide the calculation in my eyes. The penthouse in the captive building downtown. The previous tenant just moved out. Since I have worked with the company for so long, I can ask for an employee discount. I did not tell him I owned the building. I did not tell him the discount was actually a full subsidy hidden in the company ledgers. When Jason moved in a week later, he stood on the balcony overlooking the city lights. His chest puffed out. I really negotiated them down. Mom, he told me, leaning against the railing. I think the property manager saw my potential. It is all about leverage. You have to know how to talk to these people. I am sure you did. Honey, I said, biting my tongue. Then came the car. He needed to look the part of a successful attorney. He said, I called Kurt, my CEO, and instructed him to release a new Mercedes from our executive fleet for Jason's use. I made sure Kurt signed the paperwork, so my name appeared nowhere. When Jason drove it up to my driveway, he patted the hood lovingly. Kurt is a smart guy. He knows having a top-tier lawyer driving their car is good advertising. It is a win-win. The pattern was set. When he married Brianna, a girl who seemed to live her entire life through the lens of a smartphone camera, I gave them a black credit card linked to my private account. "This is for emergencies," I told them, pressing the cold plastic into Jason's hand. "Medical issues, car breakdowns, just to keep you safe." "Thanks, Mum," Brianna said, barely looking at me. "We will probably never use it." But emergency turned out to be a very flexible word. First, it was a flight upgrade to Tahiti because economy class gave Jason back pain. Then it was a $5,000 handbag because Brianna needed to impress a client. Then came the spa weekends and the Michelin star dinners. I sat in my small brick house in the suburbs south of Denver, reviewing the statements. Every month, I saw five-figure sums vanish, and every month, I paid the bill without a word. I told myself I was being a good mother. I lived simply, wearing coats I had owned for 10 years and driving a pickup truck that rattled when it went over 40 miles per hour. Jason would visit my home, look around at my faded wallpaper, and sigh with exaggerated pity. "Do not worry, Mom," he would say, patting my shoulder. "Once I make partner, I will help you get a better place. You should not have to live like this." He had no idea that the rusty safe in my closet held deeds and bonds worth tens of millions of dollars. He had no idea he was standing in the home of one of the wealthiest women in Colorado. I let him believe his narrative because I thought his happiness was worth my silence. The breaking point, though I did not realize it at the time, happened just 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. I was sitting at my kitchen table with my laptop, listening to a business podcast Jason had been invited onto. "So, Jason," the host asked, "how did you achieve so much success at such a young age?" I leaned in, eager to hear him mention his hard work. Sure, but perhaps also the support system that held him up. "It is all about grit." Jason's voice came through the speakers, smooth and confident. "I started with nothing. My parents, well, my dad passed early, and my mum. She never really understood the business world. I had to claw my way up. I do not owe anyone a dime. Everything I have, the apartment, the car, the lifestyle, it all came from these two hands." I stared at the screen. My heart gave a painful, hollow thump. He actually believed it. My love had not helped him. It had blinded him. I closed the laptop slowly, the silence of my empty, paid-off house ringing in my ears. That was the moment I realized that by giving him everything, I had left him with nothing of value. I locked the bedroom door, the click of the latch serving as the first note in a new symphony of consequences. The muffled sounds of laughter and clinking glasses drifted in from the living room, the room Jason believed he owned. The room Brianna claimed was too expensive to maintain. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands resting on the duvet cover I had purchased 3 years ago. I reached for the small, battered suitcase I kept under the bed. Inside was a portable fireproof safe. I spun the dial, the tumblers falling into place with a mechanical precision that mirrored my state of mind. Inside lay the paper trail of my son's life. I pulled out the articles of organization for Everline Communities, the deed to this penthouse, the registration for the Mercedes-Benz outside, and the monthly statements for the black card currently in Brianna's purse. Every single document bore the name Eleanor M. Hartley. I picked up my phone and dialed. It was late, but I knew Kurt would answer. "Eleanor." His voice was thick with sleep. "Is everything all right?" "No, Kurt, it is not," I said, my voice steady and cold. "I need you to prepare a legal packet for first thing tomorrow morning. I want the lease agreement for the penthouse terminated immediately, effective tomorrow." 30 days notice to vacate? Wait. The penthouse Jason's place. Kurt stammered. It is not Jason's place. It is Everline property. I corrected him. I also want the company vehicle recalled. Send the tow truck to the garage tonight. And Kurt, freeze the auxiliary credit card ending in 4599. Audit every transaction from the last 12 months. Eleanor, Kurt sighed, the sound of him sitting up in bed audible over the line. You made me swear never to let him know you were the majority shareholder. If I do this, he is going to find out everything. I do not want him to know just yet, I said, staring at my reflection in the dark window. I want him to feel the consequences first. Process it as a standard corporate asset recovery. Make him believe his luck has simply run out. I hung up and immediately dialed my estate attorney, Mrs. Lawton. She answered on the second ring. Eleanor, it is Thanksgiving, she said, though her tone was alert. I know. Margaret, I need to make an emergency codicil to my will, I said. The direct inheritance clause for Jason. Suspend it. Place all assets into a conditional trust. He does not see a dime unless he meets specific employment and lifestyle benchmarks that we will define later. If I die tonight, I want him to inherit nothing but my old pickup truck. I will draft it immediately, she replied, sensing the iron in my voice. I ended the call and turned to the closet. I pulled out my old travel bag. I did not pack the silk robes Jason had bought me for my birthday to keep up appearances. I packed my flannel shirts, my blood pressure medication, and a worn photo album of Michael. I caught sight of myself in the vanity mirror. The woman staring back was 62 years old, with deep lines etched around her mouth, but her eyes were dry and sharp. The weeping mother was gone. The CEO had returned. I zipped the bag and walked to the door. I took a deep breath and opened it. The party was still in full swing. Jazz music played softly. I gripped the handle of my suitcase and began to walk. The wheels rumbled loudly against the hardwood floor, a harsh, grinding sound that cut through the conversation. One by one, the guests turned. The laughter died out. Jason looked up from his wine, his brow furrowing as he saw the suitcase. Mom, where are you going? Brianna rolled her eyes, leaning back in her chair. Oh, please, do not be dramatic, Eleanor. We were just talking like adults. You do not have to make a scene just because. You two just taught me a very valuable lesson about independence. I interrupted, my voice projecting clearly to every corner of the room. I am simply going to follow your advice. I did not wait for a response. I walked past the marble island, past the guests who refused to look at me, and out the front door. I took the elevator down to the lobby, the silence of the lift soothing my nerves. Outside, a modest black sedan from the Everline fleet was waiting, just as I had arranged via text moments ago. My driver, a man who had been with Michael and me since the beginning, opened the door. To the brick house, ma'am? He asked. Yes, I said, climbing into the back seat. As the car pulled away from the towering glass building, I looked up one last time at the penthouse balcony. From tomorrow, I whispered to the empty seat beside me. No one lives on my lies anymore. My head was pounding from the wine I had consumed the night before, trying to wash away the awkward memory of Mom storming out. I reached for my phone on the nightstand, expecting an apology text from her. Instead, a notification from Everline Communities sat at the top of my screen. Subject, notice of lease, non-renewal. I sat up, blinking against the morning light. The email was standard, cold, and impersonal. It stated that my lease for the penthouse would be terminated in 30 days. I laughed out loud, a dry, incredulous sound. It had to be a glitch in their system. I dialed the VIP tenant hotline immediately. "This is Jason Hartley in Penthouse 4, I said, putting on my best courtroom voice. "I just received an automated email error. I need you to clear it. I am a preferred tenant." "One moment, Mr. Hartley," the representative said. Her voice was smooth but indifferent. After a pause, she returned. "There is no error, sir. The owner has exercised the right to terminate the month-to-month agreement. You have 30 days to vacate. If you wish to reapply for a unit in the building, the new rate will be adjusted to current market value, which is roughly double what you were paying." "Double? Do you know who I am?" I snapped. "I know the CEO. I want to speak to—" "Hello?" She had hung up, furious. I threw the covers off. I needed to get to the Everline headquarters and straighten this out with Kurt personally. I threw on a tracksuit and took the elevator down to the garage. I walked toward my reserved spot, keys in hand, ready to unleash hell. My spot was empty. I froze. A tow truck was just exiting the ramp, and hooked to the back was my silver Mercedes. "Hey!" I screamed, sprinting after it. "Hey, that is my car!" I chased it to the gate, but the driver just pointed to a neon orange sticker on the windshield Asset Recovery Corporate Fleet Recall. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was Brianna. I answered, breathless. "Jason," she was screaming, her voice cracking with hysteria. "Jason, you have to fix this. It is humiliating." "Calm down," I panted. "They took the car. I am dealing with it." "The car? Who cares about the car?" she shrieked. "I am at the boutique in Cherry Creek. I just tried to buy the limited edition clutch. The card declined. Jason declined. The cashier cut it up in front of everyone. She said the primary account holder reported it lost or stolen." "What primary account holder?" I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. "That is our card." "No, it is not," Brianna sobbed. "The bank fraud department just told me the account belongs to Eleanor M. Hartley. Your mother cancelled it." "Jason, she cancelled everything. People are staring at me like I am a criminal." The realization hit me like a physical blow. "Mom." I called an Uber. It was a beat-up sedan that smelled of stale pine air freshener. I sat in the back, my knees cramping, rage boiling over. When we pulled up to the glass and steel Everline headquarters, I stormed past the security desk. "I am here to see Kurt," I told the receptionist. "Now." While she made the call, I paced the lobby. I had been here a dozen times, but I had never really looked at the history wall. I stopped in front of a black and white photo from the 80s. It showed a man in work boots and a woman with a ponytail standing in front of a half-finished apartment complex. I squinted. The man looked exactly like the old photos of my dad. And the woman, Jason. Kurt's voice came from behind me. I spun around. "What is going on?" "Kurt. Why is Mum's name on the credit cards? Why are you towing my car?" Kurt led me into a glass-walled conference room and gestured for me to sit. He remained standing. "The car, the apartment, the expense accounts," Kurt said, his voice devoid of its usual warmth. "They were never yours. Jason, they were corporate perks extended to you as a courtesy by the majority shareholder." That courtesy has been revoked. Who is the majority shareholder? I slammed my hand on the table. I want to talk to the owner. Is it some private equity firm? I will sue them for wrongful eviction. Kurt looked at me with a mixture of pity and disbelief. He leaned forward, resting his knuckles on the table. Jason, he said softly, you have been eating dinner with the owner your entire life. You just never bothered to ask how she paid for the food. I stared at him, my mouth opening and closing. The woman in the photo, the woman in the old coat, the woman I had told to move out. I ran out of the building. I needed to hear someone say it was a lie. I ordered another Uber, this time for a long ride out to the countryside, to my grandmother's nursing home. When I burst into her room, Grandma was knitting by the window. I fell to my knees beside her chair, grabbing her hand. Grandma, tell me it is not true. I begged. Mom, she is just a housewife. She lives on a pension. She cannot own Eveline. She cannot be the one doing this to me. Grandma stopped knitting. She looked at me over her spectacles, her eyes sharp. Oh, Jason, she said, shaking her head slowly. You really are blind. Your mother and father started that company with sawdust in their hair and holes in their shoes. They built an empire while you were sleeping in a crib they refinished themselves. She pulled her hand away from mine. Did you honestly think, she asked, her voice trembling with disappointment, that your mother could pay for your fancy law degree and your lifestyle on a social security check? The floor seemed to drop out from under me. I was not a self-made man. I was a child playing dress-up in his mother's clothes, and she had finally decided to take them back. I called my mother 47 times in 3 days. I left voicemails that swung wildly between pathetic apologies and self-righteous anger. I told her I was sorry. Then 10 minutes later, I shouted into the receiver that she was being cruel. Through it all, she never picked up. I imagined her sitting in her kitchen, listening to my voice fill the empty room, her face unreadable, deleting each message the moment it ended. The silence from her end was loud, but the noise in my own home was deafening. Brianna was pacing the living room of the penthouse, dodging the cardboard boxes I had started to pack. You have to sue her. Jason, she snapped, throwing a designer blouse into a pile. Squatters' rights. Something you are a lawyer, for God's sake. Fix this. There is nothing to fix. Bree, I said, sitting with my head in my hands. I checked the deeds. I checked the trust, the car, the apartment, the credit lines. They were never ours. I was just a guest. Brianna stopped. She looked at me with a cold, terrifying calculation. So we have nothing? She asked, her voice dangerously quiet. You actually have nothing. I have my salary, I offered weakly. Your salary cannot support the life I signed up for, she said. She walked to the bedroom and returned with her largest Louis Vuitton suitcase. I am going to my parents' house in Florida. Do not follow me. Brianna, wait. I stood up, reaching for her arm. She pulled away, her eyes wet but hard as flint. I can't do this. Jason, I did not sign up for a cheap life. Call me when you are somebody again. She left the keycard on the marble counter and walked out. The freefall did not stop there. The following Monday, the senior partners at my law firm called me into a glass-walled office. They had been auditing my files. It turned out that a significant portion of my successful closings involved shell companies connected to Eveline communities. It looks like a conflict of interest. Jason, the managing partner said, sliding a file across the desk. We cannot prove you knew, but, well, the optics are terrible. We are moving you to document review. The bonus is off the table. I was demoted to the basement, checking typos for half the pay. 2 weeks later, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city. The walls were painted a depressing shade of beige, and the air conditioner rattled like a dying engine. I stood in the middle of the room, holding a bag of groceries that I had calculated down to the last penny. $7 for bread and eggs. I had actually put back a jar of brand-name pasta sauce because it cost $2 more than the generic can. One evening, trying to escape the smell of mildew in my hallway, I went for a walk. I found myself in a working-class neighborhood, standing in front of a low-rise brick building. The sign out front read, Everline Communities. I walked closer and saw a small, tarnished brass plaque near the entrance, dedicated by Michael and Eleanor Hartley, believing that everyone deserves a decent roof over their heads. A young woman walked out, balancing a laundry basket on her hip and holding a toddler's hand. She saw me staring at the plaque. "You looking for an apartment?" she asked. "I think Unit 2B is opening up." "No," I said, my throat tight. I was just looking at the names. "Oh, the Hartleys." She smiled, shifting the basket. "Good people. Well, I never met the husband. But Miss Ellie, she is a saint. She comes by every month to check the boiler herself." "She comes here?" I asked. "Yeah." The woman nodded. "Last winter, when my hours got cut at the diner, I was terrified I'd get evicted. Miss Ellie told me to pay what I could and make it up later. She even brought my son a winter coat. We call her the ghost landlord because she never takes credit, but she is always there." I felt a physical ache in my chest. I had spent years calling my mother a dependent, a woman who rode on my coattails. Standing there on the cracked sidewalk, I realized she had been the giant holding up the sky, and I was just the fool who thought he was flying. That night, I lay on a thin mattress on the floor of my new apartment. Through the paper-thin walls, I could hear my neighbors arguing. "We do not have the money. Dave." A woman was screaming. "We have to choose between the car payment and the rent." I curled onto my side, pulling the scratchy blanket up to my chin. This was the real pressure. This was the reality my mother had known. The reality she had built a fortress to protect me from. And I had thrown her out of it. I opened my laptop. The screen glow was the only light in the room. I typed out an email to her. I did not ask for money. I did not ask for the penthouse. "Mom?" I typed, my fingers trembling. "I went to the building on 4th Street today. The tenant told me about the coat. I just want to see you. I do not want anything else. Please." I hit send. I stared at the screen for an hour, watching the minutes tick by. 1 in the morning, 2 in the morning. The inbox remained empty. The silence was the loudest thing I had ever heard. I walked into the senior partner's office at the law firm and placed my resignation letter on the mahogany desk. There was no counteroffer, just a curt nod and a security guard to escort me out. I traded my corner office with the panoramic view for a cramped, windowless cubicle at the Denver Tenant Defense Fund. The annual salary was $45,000, which was less than what I used to spend on vacations in a single year. But for the first time in months, the air in my lungs felt breathable. My days were no longer filled with corporate mergers or high-stakes acquisitions. Instead, my workspace smelled of damp wool, stale coffee, and desperation. I spent hours listening to single mothers who were being evicted for being 3 days late on rent because their car broke down. I spoke with immigrants who were terrified to report broken heaters because they feared the landlord would call immigration enforcement. Before, these people were just statistics in a spreadsheet I would skim over while sipping scotch. Now, they were sitting 2 feet away from me, their hands shaking as they held onto crumpled eviction notices. The irony of my situation hit me during a mediation session on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was representing a young family facing eviction from an apartment complex on the north side. Across the table sat the property manager, a man named Miller. He worked for Everline Communities. He had no idea who I was. "The contract is clear," Miller stated, tapping the document with a bored expression. "Clause 4B states that unauthorized pets are grounds for immediate termination. They brought a dog in. They are out." I looked at the lease. I recognized the font. I recognized the standard boilerplate language my mother's lawyers had drafted years ago. I knew exactly where the loopholes were because I had grown up listening to my mother complain about how hard it was to enforce them legally. "The unauthorized pet is a therapy dog for an autistic child, Mr. Miller," I argued, my voice steady but forceful. "Under the Fair Housing Act, reasonable accommodation must be made. If you push this eviction, I will drag Everline into a discrimination lawsuit that will cost the company 10 times more than a carpet cleaning fee. Do you really want to explain that expense to the regional director?" Miller blinked, surprised by my aggression and my knowledge of internal protocol. He folded his arms. "Fine. We can make an exception this time. But they pay a deposit." I started keeping a notebook. I wrote down the rigid policies of Everline, not to attack the company, but to understand the tightrope my mother walked. I began to see the cracks in the system she had built, places where efficiency crushed humanity. One afternoon, an elderly client named Mr. Alvarez sat across from me. He was fighting a rent increase he could not afford on his fixed pension. He watched me organize his paperwork with a critical eye. "You have soft hands, son," Mr. Alvarez said, squinting at me under the fluorescent lights. "You ever lived in a place where the radiator screams at night and the landlord does not pick up the phone?" I hesitated, thinking of the heated floors and the 24-hour concierge service in the penthouse. I used to live in a penthouse downtown," I confessed quietly, feeling the shame burn my neck. Mr. Alvarez laughed, a dry, rasping sound that turned into a cough. "Well, seems like it is time you step down to the ground so you can learn how to walk like the rest of us. I lost some cases, and those nights were hard, but I won others. When I helped a family of 4 keep their home for another 6 months. The father grabbed my hand. He did not offer me a cigar or an invite to a gala. He just cried. "Thank you," he choked out, his grip tight. "Thank you for saving us." That night, lying on the thin mattress in my small apartment, I stared at the ceiling. Without the Mercedes, without the credit card, without the Hartley name opening doors. Who was I? The question used to terrify me. But now it felt like a challenge. I was just a lawyer who knew how to read the fine print. And for the first time in my life, that felt like enough. A week later, a colleague tapped on my cubicle wall. "Hey, Jason," she said. "There is a group of young architects meeting tonight. They are looking for legal counsel for a passion project. No money in it, really, But it sounds like your thing. What is the project? I asked. They want to turn a derelict motel on the outskirts of town into 80 units of affordable housing, she replied. They have the design, but they are drowning in zoning laws. I grabbed my coat. This was the spark I had been waiting for. The Harbour Bridge Homes project was not glamorous. It was a rotting, abandoned motel on the frayed edge of the city that smelled of mildew and bad history. But my team and I saw a future where it could become 80 units of dignified, affordable housing for the working class. We spent weeks sweating over the blueprints and agonizing over a financial model that prioritized sustainability over aggressive profit margins. We had the vision, but we lacked the capital to buy the land. Then came the email. An anonymous investment fund expressed interest in a pitch meeting. When I scrolled down to the location, my breath hitched in my throat. The address was a skyscraper in Dallas, Texas. It was the new corporate headquarters of Everline Communities. I almost deleted the email. I sat in my cramped cubicle, staring at the screen, my finger hovering over the trash icon. I could not face her. I could not walk into her kingdom as a beggar after being exiled as a prince. But then I heard my grandmother's voice in my head, sharp and clear from my visit the week before. You cannot run forever, Jason. If you believe in this work, you fight for it. Even if the dragon guarding the gate is your mother. I bought a cheap economy ticket to Dallas. I wore a suit I had bought at a discount store. Not the bespoke Italian silk I used to wear. And I carried my presentation on a thumb drive instead of a leather-bound portfolio. When I walked into the conference room on the 42nd floor, the air was so cold it felt sterilized. The table was a vast expanse of polished glass. Sitting around it were the sharks I used to drink scotch with Kurt, the CEO, Mrs. Lawton, the company attorney, and 3 other board directors. And at the head of the table sat the chairman. Eleanor Hartley was not wearing her old cardigans. She was dressed in a sharp, slate-grey power suit that cost more than my current annual salary. Her hair was styled perfectly, and her eyes were terrifyingly blank. "Please, sit," she said. Her voice did not hold a trace of warmth. "I am Eleanor Hartley, chairman of Everline Communities. Today, we are here to listen to the proposal of the Harbour Bridge project. We are not here to listen to the excuses of my son." The room went dead silent. My hands were trembling as I plugged in my laptop. But when the title slide flickered onto the screen, something settled inside me. I was not here to ask for an allowance. I was here to fight for the 80 families who were currently sleeping in their cars. The current model of gentrification is unsustainable. I began, my voice gaining strength. Harbour Bridge offers a consistent, low-yield return of 4% annually, but with a tenant retention rate projected at 95%. We are not building luxury. We are building stability. For the next hour, I was grilled. The liability insurance on a retrofitted motel is a nightmare. One director shot back. What happens if the plumbing fails in year 2? We have factored a 15% contingency fund into the initial capital raise. I answered immediately, flipping to the risk assessment slide. And we have secured a tentative agreement with a local trade union for maintenance at a reduced rate in exchange for housing vouchers for their apprentices. I answered every question. I did not bluff. I did not charm. I simply knew the facts because I had lived the reality of the problem for the last 6 months. Through it all. Eleanor sat silently, taking notes with a silver pen, occasionally glancing up at me with eyes as sharp as a scalpel. "The margins are too thin?" A director named Stevens grumbled, crossing his arms. Too many ethical constraints on rent increases. It does not fit our aggressive growth targets. It fits our legacy, another director countered quietly. This is exactly how the company started 30 years ago. They argued back and forth while I stood there, feeling the sweat trickle down my back. Finally, Eleanor closed her notebook. The snap of the cover echoed like a gunshot. "The proposal is approved," she announced. I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for a year. "However," Eleanor continued, turning her gaze directly on me, "there are conditions. Everline will fund the acquisition and construction. Jason Hartley will serve as the project director." My heart leaped, but she raised a hand to stop me. "Do not smile yet," she said coldly. "You will be a contract employee. You will receive no company vehicle, no housing allowance, no bonuses. Your salary will be capped at the standard industry rate for a junior project manager. You will report to the board monthly, and if you miss a single deadline or go $1 over budget, we will terminate you and the project immediately." She stood up, leaning her hands on the glass table. "This is not a gift from your mother. Jason," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that carried more weight than a scream. "This is the final test of you as a man. Do not fail it." The dust at the Harbour Bridge construction site was not the romantic, golden haze I had imagined during the pitch meeting. It was gritty, tasting of cement and exhaust, coating the back of my throat. I stood on the raw concrete foundation, adjusting my hard hat, feeling the physical weight of the clipboard in my hand. Every signature I put on these invoices was a promise, and for the first time in my life, there was no safety net to catch me if I fell. The crisis hit on a Tuesday morning. I was inspecting the framing for the east wing when I noticed the lumber stamps looked wrong. I pulled a piece of wood from the stack and realized it was untreated pine, not the pressure-treated timber specified in the contract. I dragged the subcontractor, a man named Henderson, into the temporary office trailer. "You are charging us for premium lumber and installing kindling," I said, slamming the invoice onto the metal desk. "If a fire starts in this complex, it will burn down in 10 minutes. Rip it all out." "Look, Mr. Hartley," Henderson sneered, leaning back in his chair. "If we rip it out, you are looking at a delay of 3 weeks. And the cost? Well, that is going to blow your budget by at least $40,000. Do you really want to explain that to your board?" He was right. The budget was razor thin, but I could not sign off on a death trap. I issued the stop work order. The backlash was immediate. My phone rang. It was a representative for a group of minority shareholders. "Jason, we are hearing disturbing things about cost overruns." The voice on the line said, smooth as oil. "There is a solution. If you convert 1/3 of the ground floor units from affordable housing to market rate rentals, we can cover the loss. It is just a small adjustment. Do this, and we will see about getting you a permanent vice president title next quarter." I stared at the phone. It was the easy way out. It was the old Jason's way out. Sacrifice the mission to save my skin. Before I could answer, my other line rang. It was Kurt. "Jason, get on the next plane to Dallas," Kurt said, his voice tight. "It is your mother. She collapsed during a meeting. It is her heart." The flight was a blur of turbulence and terror. When I ran into the cardiac wing of the hospital in Dallas, the sterile smell of antiseptic made me nauseous. I found room 304 and froze in the doorway. Eleanor Hartley, The Iron Lady of Real Estate looked terrifyingly small. She was hooked up to a beeping monitor, her skin the color of old parchment. She was wearing a pale blue hospital gown that seemed to swallow her whole. For the first time, I saw the wrinkles not as signs of wisdom, but as cracks in a fragile vase. I walked to the bedside. Her eyes fluttered open. "Mum," I choked out, my voice breaking. I am so sorry." She shifted slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at the IV line in her hand. Do not start with the apologies, Jason," she whispered, her voice rasping and weak. "Why are you not at the site?" "There are problems, Mum," I confessed, dropping my head into my hands. "The contractor cheated us. The shareholders want me to cut the affordable units to fix the budget. They want me to sell out the poor families to save the project. If I do not, Everline takes a hit, and I lose everything." I looked at her, hoping for her to tell me it was okay to compromise, hoping she would make a call and fix it like she used to fix my credit card bills. Eleanor took a shallow, rattling breath. She turned her head slowly to look me in the eye. The gaze was dim, but the steel was still there, buried deep. I cannot save you this time, Jason," she said, each word costing her visible effort. "And I will not. Whether I live another 20 years or 20 minutes does not matter. What matters is who you are when you sign that paper." A nurse bustled in, checking the monitors. "Mr. Hartley, you need to leave. She needs absolute rest. Her stress levels are too high." I stood up, feeling helpless. My mother reached out a trembling hand and gripped my wrist. Her grip was surprisingly strong. "Listen to me," she hissed, her eyes locking onto mine with a desperate intensity. "If you choose the easy path again, if you sell those people out, that will be the last time, the very last time. I let you use the name Hartley. Do not make us into the people I fought against my whole life." The nurse gently pushed me toward the door. I looked back one last time. My mother closed her eyes, her chest rising and falling in a jagged rhythm, leaving me alone in the hallway with the hardest decision of my life. 3 weeks later, the town hall meeting for the Harbour Bridge project felt less like a celebration and more like an execution. The community centre was packed to capacity with anxious families hoping for a home and local reporters hungry for a scoop on the controversial pilot programme. I sat at the long table on the stage, the heat of the stage lights prickling my skin. To my right sat the board of directors. To my left sat my mother. Eleanor looked frail. Her skin was still pale from her hospital stay, and she breathed with a careful, measured rhythm. But her back was as straight as a steel beam. Mr. Stevens, the most conservative shareholder, stood at the podium. He adjusted the microphone and smiled a shark-like smile at the audience. "Ladies and gentlemen," Stevens purred, "to ensure the long-term viability of this asset, we are proposing a slight optimization. By converting 30% of the ground floor units into premium market-rate apartments, we can offset rising construction costs. This ensures profitability while still, technically, serving the community. I believe our project director, Mr. Hartley, agrees that this is the only logical path." He gestured toward me. The room went silent. Hundreds of eyes fixed on me. I stood up, my legs feeling like lead. I looked down at the folder in my hands. Inside was the evidence of the subcontractor's fraud and the financial report proving we could survive the loss if we cut executive bonuses instead of affordable units. For 3 heartbeats, time suspended. I saw the ghost of my old life. If I nodded and agreed with Stevens, I would be back in the inner circle. The penthouse, the Mercedes, the dinners where I didn't have to look at the prices on the menu. It was all waiting for me behind a single word of agreement. Then I looked at the front row. A young father was holding a sleeping baby, his eyes wide with fear that I was about to price him out of a future. I looked at my mother. She was staring straight ahead, her face unreadable. I walked to the microphone. "Mr. Stevens is lying," I said, my voice echoing through the hall. Gasps rippled through the room. Stevens turned purple. "The budget crisis," I continued, holding up the report, "is not due to the market. It is due to fraud. The subcontractor used substandard materials to pocket the difference. And I take full responsibility. I was not watching closely enough because I was worried about my own reputation. But we will not fix my mistake by punishing these families." "This is preposterous," Stevens shouted. "You are fired." "He is not fired." A voice cut through the chaos. Eleanor stood up. It took her a moment to find her balance, but when she did, she commanded the room. She walked to the podium, gently moving me aside. "The board accepts Jason's report," she announced, her voice raspy but amplifying over the murmurs. "Everline will terminate the corrupt contract immediately. We will absorb the financial loss to repair the defects. Every single unit will remain affordable. We keep our word." The residents erupted into applause, but Eleanor raised a hand to silence them. She wasn't finished. "Furthermore," she said, looking out at the press cameras, "I am announcing today that upon my passing, the majority of my assets and the ownership of Everline Communities will not pass to an individual. It will be transferred into a perpetual trust dedicated to affordable housing. There will be no easy dynasties for anyone." She turned slowly to face me. The room fell so quiet I could hear the hum of the ventilation system. This was it. The public verdict. "Jason," she said, and for the first time her eyes softened, though her jaw remained set. "You told me once that I was a burden in your house. You were wrong. I was never the burden. Your greed was... your entitlement was the weight that was crushing you." I felt the tears prick my eyes, hot and sudden. "From this day forward," she continued, her voice trembling slightly with emotion, "I am removing the safety net. I will not be the cushion that catches you when you fall anymore. You will work for your salary like everyone else in this room. But if you choose to stand here, on this side of the line, fighting for people who cannot fight for themselves, then I will stand with you, not with my money, but with the name your father and I built. That is the only inheritance you have earned today." I broke. I stood there on the stage, in front of the cameras and the board, and wept. I wasn't crying for the millions I had just lost. I was crying because the heavy, suffocating mask I had worn for years finally shattered. I nodded, wiping my face with my sleeve, accepting the terms of my new life. Eleanor watched me, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. And then, with a look of profound relief, she slowly sat down. The lesson was over. Thank you so much for listening to this story on Grandma's Family Diary. I would love to know where you are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below with your city or country and share your thoughts on Jason's final decision. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button, like the video, and press the hype button to help our stories reach even more people.